Okay, so this is for real. Hi everyone. Welcome to Data Quality Meetup. We're going to wait for just a couple of minutes before kicking off. We'll wait for a few more folks to join. And in the meantime, please let us know where are you joining from. There's a chat button at the right corner of the screen. Wow, the meetup becomes really, really global. And by the way, super excited to see folks who have attended our previous meetups come back. Welcome back. And this is our third event in a series. It's incredible to see our community grow. And I would like to start with thanking everyone who is with us today, who joined. Most of the folks who have signed up are data practitioners or data leaders. Your work is incredibly important for your organizations and for the world. And we are here to learn, share, discuss how to do things better with higher quality and confidence, and importantly, how to enjoy the process of working with data. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gleb. I'm CEO and co-founder of Datafold. It's a data observability platform that helps companies grow faster by using that data with higher confidence and more effectively. Before Datafold, I was a data engineer, data scientist, product manager, and a founding member of data teams at Autodesk and Lyft. So got to build stuff from 0 to over 1,000 active users. And throughout my career in the industry, I've always been startled how valuable the data was that the companies I worked at had, and how important was it to do analytics and machine learning, but how little we could do and how limited we were in our ability to actually put data to use. And the reason for that was a variety of things, ranging from slow infrastructure to painfully inefficient workflows to just lack of visibility into the data sets and the gap between the producers of data and the consumers of data, leading to people redoing the work that been previously done or not being able to find the data that they wanted. And so that was the reason for why we started Datafold, and also why we're hosting this meetup, is to help data practitioners and data teams become more effective in how they work. And data quality is in general a very vast topic, and it's not only about having the right number in your spreadsheet. It also means being effective and defining correct metrics to track. It means having efficient processes for how we communicate and how we do our work. It also means sharing unambiguous visualizations with our stakeholders, making sure they interpret them correctly. It's a combination of things. And so today we will hear 5 exciting lightning talks. They're called lightning because they are short and to the point, from hands-on data leaders and practitioners. Some of these talks will be technical. Some of them will be more focused on meta topics, such as how do you run your team, or how do you even define the metrics. And we will then follow with a panel discussion with folks who are currently or have recently led large data teams to see across different industries, to see how they think about data quality, team building, and a variety of other questions that I'm sure is interesting to you all. So before we kick off our first lightning talk, I just wanted to quickly go over logistics. So you all figured out there's a chat where you can share your thoughts and cheer the guest speakers. There's also a questions tab where you can ask questions and upvote questions of others. So if you want something to be answered in the panel, or if you want the speaker to also expand on something they mentioned, please use that. And then over the course of the meetup, we'll also be asking some quick polls. So please participate and help us all learn from each other. So without further ado, I would like to welcome John Lee, the Director of Product Analytics at Thumbtack. So John has been investing a lot into data quality processes at Thumbtack, and off you go, John.
All right. Well, thank you, Gleb, and thank you everyone for making the time this morning, or wherever or whatever time zone it is where you are. I'm here to talk a little bit about what we've been doing with data quality at Thumbtack. So without further ado, let me share my screen and talk through some lightning slides. Okay, let's pull up this PDF here, and let's go into presentation mode. Cool. So we're talking about automating data quality, and the first thing is, what is Thumbtack and who am I, right? So first, what is Thumbtack? Thumbtack is a marketplace that connects local professionals and customers who are looking to get something done. So if you're looking for a handyman to fix a leaky faucet, if you're looking to get a TV mounted, you're looking to hire a DJ for that party when we all get the vaccine, Thumbtack's the app that makes it happen, and we're the marketplace that makes it happen. I'm a director on the product analytics team here at Thumbtack, and I'll talk to you today about something we've been doing on our data team to make ourselves more efficient and productive. So first of all, what is our data team? We actually have a pretty large data team. We have over 50, I think, analysts and data scientists at Thumbtack working on different data problems across our marketplace, which makes sense. The data is the lifeblood of a marketplace like ours. But we actually have a relatively small data and data platform engineering team, maybe about 5 engineers currently. We're looking to scale that team pretty aggressively for the next phase of our growth, but it's a pretty lean and nimble team. And the reason why we've been able to scale our analytics team so well has actually been because one, we hire great engineering talent, and two, they've built some fantastic tools for us in-house over the years that have enabled us to scale really well. But when you have a team this small, one natural problem is, well, how do you build your data warehouse? And the answer Thumbtack came up with was, let's have the analysts make the data warehouse. And so really the idea was, if we could just build internal tools, and we're talking like, this is like in the dark ages before GPT, before all the modern data modeling technologies, Thumbtack internal engineering just said, hey, let's go build a tool that enables our analysts to build their own data warehouse. We've come a long way since then. Our stack today is basically mostly open source. We've got Google BigQuery as a data warehouse or data platform. It's populated using jobs written in Spark, in languages like Python and Scala, or all orchestrated through Airflow, and our analysts build data visualizations in Mode and Tableau. But what ties it all together is our internal tooling that's enabled the analysts to basically write these jobs just using SQL. You don't need to know Scala or Python or what have you. Just write some SQL and magic happens. It becomes a Spark job orchestrated through Airflow. Dependencies are magically taken care of and your data appears in BigQuery. So we've got a torrent of analytics productivity at this company. I think I last checked yesterday, and I think we're at like a run rate of about 100 pull requests a month in our repo that just drives the data warehouse. This isn't even looking at repos or internal analysis or code sharing. And so that's really enabled us to scale the business very rapidly and really evolve the product rapidly, because you can only evolve the product as fast as you're learning from your data. And then once you iterate, you got new data, you've built new data sets, you're generating new events, you've got all these new things, and you luckily have the ability for your analysts to quickly go and get you the data to go look at in your dashboards. But this naturally unleashes a new problem as well. There's a reason Facebook's motto initially was move fast and break things, because you kind of have the two kind of go together. So when you've got a really productive analytics team, they're going to write a bunch of code, and not all that code is going to be great. And you know, when you're small, that's fine. But when you've got a large analytics team, you've got a large company, you're a unicorn, you're going to run into some problems if you don't try to take care of data quality. One of our company values is lead with why. And so let's talk a little bit about why data quality is a problem or risk for us. And that's because when you've got data this complex, one bug in one data set, like you just make a typo and it slips past code review, one could corrupt an entire table. Two, that table may drive other tables that you aren't even aware exist. And so you suddenly have cascading outages that mean the CEO's like, what happened to my dashboard this morning? And an entire team of analysts spends the whole day cleaning that up. And it's not just that it just annoys teams or executives. It's like there's real business impact the moment this happens. We're training production machine learning models on this data. We're automating ad bidding with this data. There's real monetary impact if we don't address these outages quickly. And so the best thing, of course, is to prevent them from happening at all. And so what we did was we said, hey, let's have a bunch of manual processes. So I took a screen cap of one of our wiki pages. Like, this is an early version of a code review playbook we wrote that basically said, hey, when you do a code review, when you author a pull request, hey, make sure that the number of rows you're touching is what you expected. The columns you're changing or touching are what you expected. Make sure you look at dependencies. And so, again, it works a little bit, but not a scalable process once you're trying to get to like 50 analysts or higher. And so you've got a bunch of spreadsheets. I've obscured some data here, but this is an actual spreadsheet an analyst made just to compare the rows that were changed by one of our pull requests. And it's like, you've got now analysis just to like make a simple change in your data warehouse. And so still a lot better than where we would have been as an industry 5-10 years ago, but still not great. And so luckily Datafold came along. And now we've got this built into our continuous integration in GitHub, where basically Datafold runs anytime you make a pull request and says, okay, here's the table you're changing. In this example, it's some table called b.serviceltv. Here's your branch, and here's what you changed. Here's any duplicate rows, like that you would change up, any like unexpected data. And there's actually a link called view diff that takes you to a view that actually shows you things like, okay, so what did you actually change in this table? Oh, it looks like some values for individual rows are different. I've like blurred out the primary keys here, but we can see right away, like, are these changes in the direction we expect? Like, do we expect there to be like truly a close to 100% match at this column, or were they expecting a bigger change? You can see right off the bat whether your data quality is like what you were expecting, and reviewers can see it too. And so now we're at the rate where basically automating code review or close to it on 100 pull requests a month. And this is just a start. We're looking to really grow the team this year because we're looking to build the next generation of our data platform as we're entering a new phase of growth. And so I got to close with a pitch. We're hiring lots of openings across our data teams. But that's my lightning talk. And thank you all for coming to my TED Talk.
Thank you very much, John. And I appreciate the shout out. So if you have any questions to John about his talk, please feel free to ask in questions or in chat. And I would like to invite our next speaker, Steph Olafsdottir, on stage.
This thing on?
Yes, it is.
Joke.
Go for it, Steph.
Sorry?
Go for it.
Yay! Okay, awesome. I will also share my screen. Share screen. Allow. And then I'll move over to Keynote and full screen it. Okay. I'm Stefania. You can call me Steph. Nice pronunciation on my name. Glad. Olafsdottir is exactly right. It means that I'm the daughter of Olaf, for those who aren't Icelandic on the call. I am here to talk a little bit about what changed data cultures for me. I used to be head of data science at a mobile game called QuizUp, which had 100 million users around the world, and had the opportunity to build up the data culture there, as well as everything on the technical side. Today, I am the CEO and co-founder of Avo, which is an analytics governance as a service tool, the next generation of analytics governance, changing how product managers, developers, and data scientists collaborate to plan, track, and govern their analytics. I want to also say thank you so much, Gleb, for hosting this. This is amazing and a great turnout. And I'm stoked to be here. What a group that I am sort of invited among. Very proud. Anyway, so I am obsessed about data culture. I believe that the gold standard to growth is self-serve analytics. However, self-serve analytics today is blocked by lack of data quality and lack of data literacy. So I want to bring you a hot take. I think the biggest blocker for good data today is the lack of alignment between data consumers and data producers. So before I go into what that means to me, I want to highlight that there are definitely technical aspects and technical challenges that block data quality, and there are endless. There's an explosion of tools that are solving this problem today, including Avo. I won't spend any more time on the technical challenges, but you can read more about Avo on avo.app. I want to talk to you about data culture. Before I go into data culture and this hot take, I want to define this. What I mean by data consumers, I mean the product managers, the data scientists, the product analysts, anyone who looks at charts. And by data producers in this context, I mean the developers, the product developers that write code to get analytics events into databases. So they write tracking calls into the product code. And I want to talk to you about the purpose meeting, which is something that we developed at QuizUp back in the days, and which I have worked with endless amount of companies as a consultant, and now I'm so lucky as the CEO of Avo to work with a lot of companies and adopting this this way of working. So I want to say that the purpose meeting has been bringing data producers and data consumers together since 2014. So before I dive into the definition of the purpose meeting, I want to highlight this. Your data is a product. I think everyone on this call really agrees with this. The reason why I want to highlight it is it has this great alignment with the general product mindset, product management mindset, which is the 4 big risks: the value risk, the usability risk, the feasibility risk, and the business viability risk, just like any other products. And what I think tends to be forgotten and speaks to the maturity of the data culture is when the data consumers see, or the data producers, both of them, they see analytics as a task for the developer. One of the things that I find changes this the most, the biggest spark for change and data quality and data literacy is when we think about the data producers and the data consumers as the same group, and we bring the data producers into becoming data consumers. My favorite tool to do that is the purpose meeting. So the definition of that, it is a noun. It is a 30-minute sit down to align stakeholders on the purpose of a product release. It maps out the highest impact and the lowest effort tracking to understand its success. The purpose meeting then is a 3-fold step. It has 3 agenda items. You review the goals of the feature release together. What does success of this feature release look like? You design the metrics together. You design on what should this be day 1 retention, for the people who signed up and then did X. You literally design the metrics of the success goal together, and then you design the event structures together. And one of the reasons why I think it is so important and fundamentally shifts data quality and data literacy to bring data consumers and data producers together to do this is that these 2 groups, the data consumers and the data producers, they all need to be aligned on all of these 3 things in order for the data quality to have to meet its standards. The engineers will know exactly what data structures you will be able to track, and they will do a better job in tracking everything correctly if they know exactly what the goal of the analytics metric is. So I still get questions around this every day, and I love referring to this document. I am not going to talk about it more today because this is a lightning talk, but you can read about this more on this link right here. I can also share it in the chat, or you can reach out to me. I'm Stefania Pierre on Twitter, and this is my email address. Super excited to talk about data cultures with anyone who is interested in that. So thoughts, questions, leave them in the comments, and thank you for inviting me here, Gleb.
Thank you so much, Steph. I think one can only imagine how many hundreds of millions or billions of dollars were wasted because features and products were launched without proper metrics. So thank you for setting the standard here. And I would like to invite our next speaker, David Wallace from Dutchy. For those of you who came here to hear some meaty technical things, you won't be disappointed. So, David, welcome to the stage.
Hey, everyone.
All right, take it away.
All right, let me share my screen. Hey everyone, really glad to be here today. I'm here today to talk about some work I did in a previous life about how my team and I were able to effectively automate debt management, specifically in our DBT deployment. So first, a little bit about myself. My name is David Wallace. I'm currently a senior data engineer at Dutchie. For those of you who aren't familiar with Dutchie, we're the largest cannabis e-commerce platform in North America. And the work I'm going to talk to you about today specifically was done originally done at a previous company called Good Eggs, but I think it's like highly transferable, and I think it may resonate with a lot of you. So to start off, something I think probably won't shock anyone here is that we love DBT. For those of you unfamiliar with DBT, DBT is a data transformation tool that effectively allows analysts and engineers to use SQL to construct data transformations in their data warehouse. It's been a total game changer for us. It's been a game changer in the data space as well for the last few years. And on top of that, has a really wonderful community. The data team at Good Eggs really enthusiastically adopted DBT into their workflows. And pretty quickly, our DBT project became the hub of all of our data transformation work. But one thing that we noticed is that as more folks started using DBT day to day, and as we started scaling the data org outwards to more and more people, the number of DBT models in our project scaled quite rapidly. And because we were deploying so many more models at any given time, the execution time of our project also scaled pretty rapidly as well. Not only this, but we also noticed that folks were suddenly having a lot harder of a time finding the content they wanted to find in our DBT project. And we noticed that this was leading to a pattern of forking DBT models instead of updating them, ultimately creating more and more project bloat over time. And what we realized is that we had a little bit of a scaling problem on our hands. We noticed that after some investigation, we noticed that about 30% of our production DBT models were essentially outdated, duplicated, or completely unused. So there's a term that we like to use for this that some of you may have heard me say elsewhere, called model atrophy. For those of you unfamiliar with what atrophy is, it's just essentially the process of something deteriorating due to a lack of use. And in our case, we noticed that a lot of our DBT models had at some point in time effectively just become vestigial to us. In other words, models that were once very relevant to the company over time became less and less relevant to us. And what we noticed was not only was this applicable to DBT models, but it also applied to other data assets as well, such as mode reports, Jupyter notebooks, et cetera. And we knew that manually curating all of these data assets was going to be quite a Herculean effort for us. So we wanted to see if there was a way that we could effectively automate the removal of all of these vestigial data assets. So the big question, how do we identify a vestigial DBT model? Well, it turns out in our case, it was relatively simple. The overwhelming majority of downstream DBT model usage for us was in the form of mode analytics reports. So for us, it was pretty reasonable for us to say, if a DBT model wasn't currently being used in any mode report, then it effectively could be considered vestigial. But then the question becomes, well, how do we connect DBT models to mode reports? Well, the first thing we did was we created a DAG of mode analytics resources. So you can see here, I've created an example DAG with nodes here for a mode report that contains multiple queries. Each of the mode query nodes in this graph has metadata attached to it that contains the underlying SQL powering that query. And then once we had that metadata, we could scan the query metadata and we could essentially build, we could find implicit references to DBT models within the metadata. We then took the existing DAG that DBT automatically constructs under the hood. And we actually extended this graph horizontally by creating edges between DBT models and mode queries that implicitly reference those DBT models. So at this point, once we have the horizontally extended graph, it becomes pretty easy to identify DBT models that don't have any downstream dependencies. Additionally, having these relationships in this graph made it pretty easy to do this process recursively as well. So that any model that had no recursive downstream path to an external dependency was deemed a candidate to be pruned. So you can see here, for example, in our graph, DBT model G, F, and E would all be deemed candidates for pruning because there's no recursive downstream path to any external data assets. But then we had another concern. Our other concern was, well, can't other kinds of data assets also become vestigial? So for example, let's say we have a DBT model that does have a mode report downstream of it. But if no one's looking at that mode report, is the DBT model really being used? To help us account for situations like this, we automated a very similar process for mode reports that essentially routinely prune them on various usage metrics. So right here is some code from a Dagster pipeline that we use to orchestrate this entire process. For those of you unfamiliar with Dagster, it's a workflow orchestration tool that's very similar to Airflow with a little bit more of a modern feature set. But effectively what we're doing here is we are routinely archiving and deleting mode reports that have particularly low usage or just haven't been run in a certain number of days. What's really nice about running these two processes in tandem, the mode pruning process and the DBT model pruning process, is that they actually synergize quite nicely together. You can see here that it effectively over time creates a really nice cascading effect where as we start to prune more and more mode reports, more and more DBT models also automatically become candidates for pruning. So in practice, what does this pruning process actually look like? Well, as I mentioned before, we orchestrate this entire process via Dagster. And the last step of this pipeline is actually automatically opening a PR containing all of the models that are being proposed to be pruned. And we've set this up so that it's relatively simple to go in and cherry pick specific models out of here in cases where a mistake has been made or something like that. So the good news is that this process seems to work quite well. The chart here shows the number of DBT models that we're deploying in our main DBT job on the y-axis. And you can see that this automated pruning process helped us get down from somewhere about 520 models at our peak to about 375 models today. So ultimately, much more manageable for our data team and our stakeholders as well. That's about it. I hope this was helpful or insightful to anyone. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to contact me on any of these channels. Thanks.
Thank you so much, David. This is great. You guys should have, or maybe will, open source this because I believe that DBT and Mode are both very popular tools loved by data teams, and so this will be great to keep everyone's data hygiene. Cool. I'd like to invite our next speaker, Josh, on stage.
Hey, Gleb.
Hi, Josh. Welcome to the stage.
Cool. All set? All right, so hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Josh Temple. I am full-time a analytics engineer at Spotify and also working on a data quality project called Spectacles, which is a continuous integration and automated testing platform for Looker and LookML. I'm going to chat about that a little bit more in a minute. But I'm going to start off with a presentation on habits that I think highly effective business intelligence engineers have. And I'm going to scope this a little bit more tightly by saying these are the technical habits of highly effective business intelligence engineers. Of course, there's lots of things that people do that aren't just writing code, but these are the technical things that I've noticed make a really good engineer in the BI world. And so I'm going to talk through these 7 things quickly. I'm going to start with the first one, which is version control. Now, I think I have experience personally with Looker and LookML, so you'll probably hear some bias there around the tools that I've used, but I also think these habits apply very well to other tools, even if you're doing something like, something like John mentioned, where you have Spark jobs or SQL queries being written by analysts. There's still ways that we can apply these habits. You just may get to the end of my talk and think that I'm pushing Looker, which is sort of true, but I think there's lots of learnings to be had here. So the first one is version control, and version control is incredibly important in the BI world and any kind of programming practice, because it allows you to ensure that you have history that you can maintain for rollbacks. When things don't go well, it's very easy to revert to a previous version. You also can experiment non-destructively. So it's once you kind of learn how to use Git and version control, it's really helpful to be able to take a branch off of something, begin working on it on your own, break it if you need to, and then follow a code review process to merge it back into production. And versioning, code around transformations for data is great. If there are ways that you can even version the content, that's even better. Being able to see the changes that people have made and have a change log is extremely helpful. The second one is testing, and testing is, of course, a huge topic. I think most of us on this call are very, interested in finding better ways to test data. One of the things that I feel like is becoming more and more important in this space is a contract between the BI tool and the data warehouse. So you have changes that are happening in the warehouse to schemas, to data. You have changes that are happening in the BI tool. So finding a way to make sure that there's a pre-tested agreement as to how that data should look before it's used for important dashboards, reports, and things like that is extremely, extremely important. Also, confirming that your data, hits a lot of different parameters, like it exists, first of all, is helpful. Uniqueness is really important when we're thinking about aggregation, freshness, all of those things, and having tests that can check those different parameters is extremely useful. Another thing that I think people are just starting to get into is mocking data to test logic. So when you have some kind of a metric that's being modeled in your BI tool, being able to throw some sample data at it, checking to see that you get the answer that you expect is a really great way to add confidence to the metrics and the KPIs that you're building in your BI tool. You can also sanity check against known values. So if you knew that your revenue was 250,000 for a given month, you can make sure that that's always the case. And if there's ever any kind of a regression in your code that would change that for a dashboard or something similar, then you'll be alerted to that in advance. And then finally, of course, catching changes to your data model that can break content. And that just goes back to that contract with the data warehouse. In the same vein of testing is continuous integration. So if you're not familiar with this term, it's really the idea around automating the running of those tests on code that has not yet been deployed into production. And so this really allows you to enforce things like code style, to check for bugs. It's also helpful because it kind of removes the case where someone is just YOLOing code into production. I was reading about a really awful horror story with a finance firm back in the early 2000s where they forgot to deploy code to one of their 8 production servers, and it actually bankrupted the company in 45 minutes. So CI is a great way to make sure that you're deploying code correctly and following all of the necessary steps. It also helps with code review because you can automate the boring stuff of checking for SQL errors and things like that, and you can focus on the actual interesting logic and design. And so this went a little fast there, but if you are in Looker, you should definitely be using Spectrals, which is a product that I'm currently building. Spectrals is a continuous integration tool that lets you check the SQL in the dimensions in your LookML, as well as checking content, checking data tests, and things like that. So really useful to be able to use something like Spectrals. Also, code review is a really useful habit as well. Of course, most of you probably do something like code review already. But code review is a great way to cover, help your teammates improve and learn, give empathetic feedback, etc. So I'm coming up on time here, so I'm going to skip through the last few slides that I have. But I also wanted to cover documentation, extensibility, and access control as really important habits to be developing, and would love to continue the conversation on these another time.
Thank you, Josh. It's interesting that I just did a quick poll on whether folks are using version control for BI tool, and I think that has been changing in the past couple of years. That most of the BI tool vendors actually adopted some sort of version control for the assets, and second, the teams have been adopting that pretty actively. And the same for CI. So it's interesting how there's been a renaissance of CI making the way from the software engineering world to the data world, which obviously opens a lot of opportunities to improve the workflows of data people. So thank you again. And I'd like to welcome our last but not least speaker, Gary, on stage. You all have probably spoke to a lot of different vendors in the space that try to sell you on big vision of how the tool is going to make your data awesome and help you unlock all the value from your data. But it's often important to understand some of the architectures and patterns that these vendors are pushing you towards. And so Gary here will present a very important distinction that we should all make when making decisions about our architectures and vendors. So take it away, Gary.
Thanks, Gleb. Really appreciate it. Hi, folks. So today we'll be talking a little bit about ETL versus ELT for the data pipelines. And just to start things off, I want to introduce myself. My name is Gary Sahota. I run the analytics team here at Clary. And for those who don't know, Clary is a revenue operations platform, effectively leveraging the data within your CRM, calendar, and emails to really help salespeople sell better and understand all the deals that they have currently going on in their pipelines. Prior to Clary, I joined about a year ago as their founding analyst, but prior to that, I've been at companies like Citus Data, which is a Postgres company acquired by Microsoft, Jasper Wireless, which was an IoT company acquired by Cisco, and I've been a California native my entire life. And so to really set the stage for a second, what I do at the company, when I joined, we were running out of Excel files and intuition, and so I came in and really did three things. I automated and consolidated Clary's data into a single source of truth, aka a data warehouse, standardized the metrics-oriented teams on a single point of view, aka consolidating KPIs and just really defining what those even need to look like and monitoring how we grow against them. And then also, really pushing Clarians at the company to make decisions with data. Right. Prior to this, we were I think a Series D company when I joined, and a lot of things were just done on the fly with intuition, and there was no data to back any decisions we made. And so now we can make decisions more confidently, just given the data stack that I built out. And so, quick overview of my architecture. We had nothing when I joined. Went back, consolidated all the different business apps. Right now I use Fivetran for my ELT process, both for extracting the data into my Snowflake data warehouse, but also using it to orchestrate my DBT models, for the transformation within there as well. And then I use BI, my BI tool of choice is Tableau. Been a certified admin for quite some time, and really kept the stack simple. I'm a one-man army, and I've had to build this out from the ground up, and so we wanted to keep things as simple and as easy as possible for folks to use. But now, going into when I was considering what to buy for the the data pipeline part of my stack, there were so many different vendors. I really didn't know what to choose or where to really spend my time, and so I wanted to understand. Okay, well, what's the difference? Like, I see all of these. There's hundreds of others. So many others that were even name dropped today. What do they really stand and what do they really do and how are they different? And so there's a clear distinction between ETL and ELT. And while some of you guys might know that, I wanted to talk about some of the pros and cons about each of them and the differences that these two approaches take. So to start things off, ETL, which is probably the most common nomenclature and one of the more traditional ways of data pipelines, really stands for extract, transform, load, meaning that data that you have from different sources first gets sent through a series of transformations, whether it's blending, whether it's aggregating, whether it's cleaning, and then only the output of these transformations gets stored in your data warehouse, which then you can use in your BI tools. Now, that's great. This is something that we've been doing for quite some time, and it is pretty much an industry norm, especially at larger enterprises like Cisco and Microsoft. But a new trend that probably came around for the last 4 or 5 years is around ELT. And what that means is that the data actually comes in, gets loaded into the warehouse first raw, and then the transformations are done either in that data lake layer or in the data warehouse layer, depending on what tool you're using. And then the transformations are stored alongside the raw data so that you have access to both, and then leverage whatever you need in the BI tool as you see fit. And there's pros and cons to both approaches, but really the fundamental difference is really when that transformation happens and if you have access to the raw data or not, in perpetuity. And so I was talking to my CTO/co-founder. We really tried to weigh out the pros and cons, and this is a quick matrix, and I thought I'd share this today to see if this would help anybody else. I mean, with ETL, the data's clean, the data, there's less data actually being loaded, so the storage costs are a lot lower as well. And it is InfoSec and cost friendly because InfoSec, for those teams who have it, like, is always trying to find ways to really focus on, covering our own butts. And so we wanted to make sure that, with the sensitive data that we have access to, that nothing is stored that shouldn't be stored in a data warehouse that other people might have access to. And given the type of data that we deal with, that could lead to a whole host of things from insider trading to a lot of other things as well. And so our InfoSec team was very, very pro ETL because it meant that only the data we needed was the data that got stored. But at the same time, there's a high maintenance cost and an upfront cost of getting those pipelines set up. And the pipelines are very rigid as well, because any changes you make in the schema of the source data or any changes you want to make to your BI reports require you to go back into the pipeline, modify what you're taking and those transformations, and then have that data reloaded into the warehouse for the BI to then consume. And so what I proposed was, let's go the ELT approach, because not only do I have access to the clean data and the transfers that I want to do, but I also have access to the raw data. And there's an undeniable lower maintenance upfront with ELT, because all it does is it just takes the data, gives it access to you, to the raw data to you immediately, and it builds a kind of a future-proof model where you might not even have to scope out exactly what you want to do with the data right now. You can spend the time and energy to really just focus on the analytics now that you need to, and then have access to the raw data so you can continue to iterate and build on top of that as well. The issue, though, at the same time that that my team called out, was that there's a lot of dirty data. I mean, it's raw data, so you're going to have to transform it. You're going to have to massage it to really get it to where you want. And sometimes the volume, especially for a company like Clarity who didn't have an analytics team prior to this, was daunting, right? It was something that they were just like, well, I don't know if we want to put all our eggs in one basket. I don't know if that's really what we need, and I don't even know if we can do that given some of the contracts that we have with our customers and the data that we'd be trying to leverage. And so there was a lot of complexities on that we had to get past, but ultimately, which do you choose? For me, I chose Fivetran, and the reason I did so was because of its easy to use nature. I swear I'm not being paid by Fivetran to say that, but at the same time, what I recommend to everyone is it depends. Pick what you feel is the best for you. Pick what you feel is going to be the best for your needs, but really weigh out the pros and cons before you do so. And follow me on LinkedIn. I do talk a lot about data and data quality, but happy to chat more with anyone if they feel like they want to.
Thank you, Gary. Looking at the poll, it looks like ELT wins as of March 2021, which makes a lot of sense. But seriously, folks, when you are talking to vendors, and in general, considering architectures, to make sure that to consider all the pros and cons of the architectures that they might be driving you towards. So I'm excited to transition to our next part of the event, which is the panel discussion. So I will invite some of our speakers back and also some folks that we haven't heard from yet. And as I am inviting people on stage, once you're up, please give a quick intro about yourself.
Hello. Hey folks, I'm Zishan. I've been an engineering manager at Shopify for about 5 years. I've been involved in building a lot of our data collection and stream processing tooling, and lately I've been involved in our effort to move from Spark to dbt.
Hi all, I'm Jillian Corkin. I just joined Fishtown Analytics as a developer relations advocate. I've been in the community for the past couple of years, and previously I was working at HubSpot for about 8 years. And there I was in a number of roles, from systems analyst, product manager, and more recently as an analytics engineer and data analyst.
Hi, everyone. My name is George. I was previously at Lyft, where I joined as the first analytics hire and then spent about 6 years building out the team, leading various functions from the early business intelligence teams to data science as well.
I think it might be me. Hi, I'm Julia. I run the data team at Carta today, and previously I was running a couple of data teams at Square and been in the data space for a long time. I know some of you on the call actually from my prior data lives. I'm excited to be here.
I think I've also not gone yet. So hi, everyone. I'm John, Director of Product Analytics at Thumbtack. I lead the analysts who work on growth on both sides of our marketplace. And before Thumbtack, I was the first analytics hire at NerdWallet, and before that, I was at Capital One.
Fantastic. We have really an all-star panel. And to kick things off, I'd like to explore what is the biggest challenge that you have recently been facing as a data leader, and how do you see that changing from, let's say, 3 or 4 years ago? So what is different in 2021 compared to a few years ago in your world?
I can go first. Half jokingly, hiring has been the biggest challenge. I don't know if anybody disagrees, but you know, I feel like the data world and the data tooling and the expectations of what our data practitioners need to know and able to do has been changing very rapidly. And so finding the people who are, you know, excited to be learning and changing their day-to-day work is sometimes a challenge. So that's kind of on the people side. In terms of sort of data, I know this is more about like kind of data quality and observability. I think one of the big challenges, or one of the big changes that I've seen is the explosion of the tools that are out there to help with data observability, data quality, data testing, lineage. And so it's been an interesting space to be in and exploring of like, what are the differences between the tools? What are the similarities? What kind of use cases they help and solve? What should we be building ourselves? What should we be paying for? And kind of like navigating this kind of very different world. And I feel like that's really the last year or two that it changed this rapidly.
Yeah, I can jump on there. I agree with everything that Julia just called out. And one of the things at HubSpot I observed is that as all of these changes were happening, data teams across the company were growing rapidly, and there just wasn't, you know, process in place to get ahead of that scale. So it's like, how do you now get buy-in across, you know, 6 or 7 teams with 100 analysts developing to convince them of the same things Julia was calling out, like just get them to stretch in their role a bit and take on different responsibilities that will, you know, essentially make their jobs easier and make the data more reliable. But it's difficult when you're working with analysts across teams that don't always have technical managers and their role isn't viewed as a technical role. Those are big challenges.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we face today as data practitioners is this tension that fundamentally exists between data governance and data democratization. So how do you enable people who are not technical, don't work with the data today, to consume data and make decisions based on data, but at the same time, make sure that they're doing the right thing? And you know, typically what companies do is they run a lot of process. They try to solve this by throwing people at the problem. And as we all know, I think there's a comment that John just made in the chat. People don't scale with the needs of the business. People don't scale with the decisions that you want to make using data. So how do you figure out how to scale that? How do you automate some things? How do you make some of the processes better? And I think a lot of the conversation that we've been having today around data quality and automation and observability fall into that bucket.
Yeah, I'll pile on and say, you know, when you talk about what's changed a lot in the past few years, like I find it more interesting to see what hasn't changed, right? Like what George talked about with governance and democratization, like that's a real problem that I think data has grappled with as long as people have been analyzing data, because there's more questions out there to answer than there are human beings capable of analyzing data, giving you answers. And I think what's been changing is, we talked about this earlier in the chat as well, like the explosion of technology just in the last couple of years that has really made it easier than ever to like implement an ELT workflow and just get access to all that raw data. And so you've democratized the raw data. And I talked about how at Thumbtack, we've like built a data warehouse as analysts around that. And then you have this governance tension because who's governing all these analysts? And you start having analysts turning into effectively the de facto engineers, trying to build data models and trying to do code review and version control and all these things that they were like, I was just hired to do analysis. And so as an analytics leader, the tension I'm trying to manage is how do we scale the right people and right functions and technologies together so we're multiplying each other and getting the most like productivity and value and bang for our buck as an analytics team.
I think you're bringing up an interesting point about the analysts too, that again, like the expectations of what the data practitioners do today is very different than it was even a couple of years ago. That, you know, it used to be if you hired a data analyst, it was like you expect them to know SQL. It may be like know how to use a BI tool. And in some cases, it could be like literally just like Tableau dashboard that somebody else maybe wrote the extract for. And now, you know, we expect analysts to understand how Git works and commits and PR reviews and, you know, use some scripting and Python. And so like there's a big shift, even though we have even more tools than before to like, you know, help us with a lot of this work. And it's a lot easier, like you said, to spin up and have data available in raw format. But at the same time, the expectations for the teams and for every person on the data team has become, there's a lot more blurred lines between like what a data engineer is, what is data scientist, what is data analyst, and you know, what the skill sets are. And it sounds like you guys definitely have that example of analysts building these ETLs, and we have that as well. So I think it's been interesting, and the observability and the definition of data becomes such much bigger problem because you don't have a couple of people who build the ETLs and the data models. All of a sudden you have like everybody on the team building ETLs and data models, and like who owns those definitions is really hard.
Very good point.
Like,
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, like, Julia, to your point, though, I think the expectations have increased because the questions have gotten deeper as well, right? Like, what I was being asked of, you know, 5 years ago from my stakeholders is not the same types of questions I'm getting asked now. People are way more informed and are expecting like a deeper level of understanding of things that just did not exist before. And so I think the appetite for analytical-based decision-making has, you know, exponentially increased, and comes with that the complexities of, okay, how do you go answer that?
It's true.
Makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering what are some of the hacks that you folks have implemented to actually enable self-serve, well, reliable and high-quality self-serve analytics in your organizations? For instance, Zishan has been quiet, but I know that he spent a lot of time thinking about how to enable the huge analytical force at Shopify with the reliable analytics capabilities.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest hack, I think something Stefania alluded to in her presentation before, was that make the data consumer and the data producer the same. And so for us, over the last 2-3 years, was making sure that our engineers are the people that they can instrument the data, and then they can use the data right away without necessarily having to rely on someone else, at least for a large portion of the job, like being able to build simple funnels, being able to build simple like growth metrics, and then they go to a data scientist as sort of an expert to consult when they have a much deeper problem.
So for things like funnels and sort of standardized kinds of analytics, are you trying to kind of build a homegrown solutions? Are you trying to adopt sort of a modular way where, let's say, you have warehouse, then an ETL transformation tool like dbt, and then let's say some general purpose BI tool like Mode or Looker? Or are you trying to go, let's say, for an end-to-end analytics tools that like Post-Hog or Amplitude or Heap that kind of give you all analytics insights out of the box? And what are some of the trade-offs that you've had considered? That's the question to everyone.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, please, by all means.
I was thinking about it. I think that most of us probably have multiple tools. Like, we do have Looker and Amplitude, and people still want potentially other options to prototype solutions, etc. So, there's a lot of overlap, which does make it interesting. Things like products like Mixpanel Amplitude make it really quick for you to do some of the funnel analysis, assuming that the eventing is done correctly, which is a huge assumption. But assuming it's great, then it allows it to do quickly. But it doesn't allow you to do more of the advanced analytics. And I think what Gary was saying is so true, that maybe what we're seeing now is that this sort of first level of questions is so much easier to answer, and product managers can go into amplitudes and mixed panels of the world and figure out what their drop-offs are, what their path are, and then they want to know, a lot more detailed information about who this customers are, or, things that you just can't get from a kind of out-of-the-box tool. And that's where analysts hopefully should be spending more of their time of helping to analyze and test those cohorts, et cetera. And then you do, build out a lot more solutions in Looker mode, Tableaus of the world, or SQL. They'll never go away.
I'd agree with that. I think like one thing that we've done is like we've taken a two-pronged approach. One is the more of the recursive, like these are types of requests that we see quarter over quarter, week over week, month over month, and then there's the more ad hoc type requests. And so for the ad hoc type requests, we treat ourselves more as a consulting shop. Come in, help really just consult and guide and help them get to where they need to go. But as we start seeing those same requests, those ad hoc requests become more recursive in nature, we'll try to build out either a dashboard or some sort of instructions, but then also have an enablement path around that. So if it's the sales team asking for sales productivity metrics, cool, we'll give them a very, very in-depth version of that in a dashboard, but then have the sales enablement team actually go train the leaders and the executives on how to use that as well. And so we leverage the team's own enablement functions to go and make sure that they're trained and can answer those questions on their own, and only come to us when it's really truly something unique and different.
On self-serve, oh, sorry, did I drop someone? Oh, on self-serve, I would say when I think of this question, I think what's the base of what we're doing as data professionals? It's metrics, right? And so I think the number one thing, going back to data governance, data democratization, is you've got a proliferation of metrics, and hopefully your people are all using the same name for the same metric, but one, that's probably not true. Two, even if they are, like, how do you know they've got the same definition of what they're calling visits or conversions? And so for me, like, the first part to enabling self-serve is getting that alignment, like with defining what is that, and then having the definition like really rolled out to the whole organization and the whole data platforms you're using, because you can use all these kinds of tools, but it almost doesn't matter if they don't have metrics with the same names, or that people can't match their understanding of what's going on in the business. Because if product says one thing and marketing says another, sales says a third thing, and they all are talking about traffic, like, what is a C exec to do? And so for me, a big thing that we have to do as data professionals is, one, ensure there's an alignment across the business on what these metrics mean. And then two, ensure that everybody's using the same definition of those metrics, whether it's in a report or an analysis or whatever tool you're using. And that's really hard, because it's a lot easier to onboard a bunch of tools. And now with ELT, it's so easy to just get a bunch of data and anyone can go make a metric. And so the short answer is, I don't have a great solution. Longer answer is, it's got to be something that doesn't stand in the way of actually making decisions with data. There's got to be something where, when it comes to telling the story of what's going on across the company and ensuring we're all rowing in the same direction, we have a same base dictionary of metrics that everybody's using, and that's accessible and available and usable in all the different tools people are using to look at their data and do analysis.
Yeah, 100% to everything that John just said. I think if you really think about what making decisions based on data boils down to, it boils down to the atomic unit of a metric, right? Whether you're looking at a forecast of revenue, whether you're looking at the result of an experiment on conversion, or whether you're looking at a chart of MAUs and trying to understand whether it went up or down last week and why, you need to have faith and clarity into that underlying metric to be able to make a decision at the end. And I think the tension that we see today is that, tying this back to, I think, the previous question, data consumers want data and the tools of their choice. So, we can build them the dashboard in Looker or in Mode, but at the end of the day, the reason that product managers, for example, choose Heap, or they choose Amplitude, or they choose Mixpanel is because they get the interface that they want. And I think the tension that as a data practitioner, I would love for all the data to be centralized in one place. But to really serve the end users, we also have to deliver the data into the interfaces that people want. So, I think there's this key missing piece around how do you take metrics, centralize them, govern them in the right way, and then actually deliver them to people's fingertips. And we have to solve both of those problems. You can't just choose, let me centralize the metrics and point everyone to one dashboard. And you also can't have the case where you have 10 different fragmented tools, all with their own definitions that everyone's using separately, because that's just chaos.
Yeah, I think to George's point, using more tools also means that auditability becomes harder. Like every tool has their own way, and just not having a centralized like repo or store of how a model has been updated over time can make things harder when things diverge.
It's interesting how the data stack becomes very modularized, right, these days, and you have these new niches that open up and problems that almost demand a new solution and a new product. I'm wondering what have been the things that you decided to build in-house, I assume, and for what reason in your data stack or in your overall analytical stack?
I can start with that one, actually. So Clary's in a unique position where the product we sell is an analytics product as well for sales leaders. And so I think pretty much all of our revenue metrics for sales, finance, marketing, customer success have been built in-house. And one of the biggest things we built is a time series data hub, is what we call it, which is essentially a snapshotted version of your CRM. And it can identify deltas over time and show you at points of time what your CRM was saying and where deals stood and then how things changed over the quarter or over a specific time period. And those types of insights have been super valuable for us internally, but then we turn around and actually productize those exact insights and then make them available in our product as well. And so it becomes hard to say, like, where does the line stop between what needs to be productized and what's only for internal and what's outside the scope of our product. But we try to make that into a balancing act of, okay, what is the most impactful, what is the most useful, and what is the most unique? Like, we're not going to sit here building pie charts for people because there's millions of tools that can go build that, right? We want to focus on the net new, and on things that we know the time to value would be much faster if we can build it in-house than try to build a custom solution, try to upkeep it ourselves. But it's a balancing act, really.
I can speak to, at HubSpot, there's a high appetite for building things in-house. It's just a cultural thing. And that works great when your team's small and nimble and the team that is, building whatever service or tool is actively supporting it and, has that, they're excited about it, they're invested because it's a new thing they're building internally. What I've seen and experienced though is that over time, that appetite diminishes as more work comes in and the in-house tool you built doesn't get the love required to keep up with the business needs. And then you just end up in this really messy space where, if you bring a third-party tool to the table to say, hey, let's migrate over to something that now exists in the market, it's hard to sell to leadership because you're not getting any net gain per se. It's basically going to bring you back to the functionality that you had. It's just going to make it easier to maintain, scale, and grow from. So it's like that. There's this tension between well, we're going to do this. You're not going to notice any difference immediately, but trust us. We kind of need to. It's tech debt. It ends up being tech debt unless you're really going to invest in it and own it long term. And I think to Gary's point, the opinion that I sort of developed over time is that if you're not, as a company, planning to make this an external facing product, you should probably question whether or not it's the right investment.
Yeah. To Jillian's point, Shopify traditionally has built almost everything in-house, but the biggest roadblock because of that has been hiring and training. And as open source technology matures, and not even third-party technology, right? You can still run the infrastructure, but as long as you can collaborate with the community, just sharing knowledge across companies and sharing best practices becomes so much easier.
Yeah, I was going to say what Zisan just said. I found that using industry standard tooling is actually a really good recruiting selling point. And once you've recruited that strong talent, it's so much easier to onboard them because they already know how to use Mode, they already know how to use GitHub, and they already know how to use Tableau. And so that has, I think, resulted in, at least for me personally, a really strong bias to avoiding building new things when there's something off the shelf that's open source or commercially available. And you should need a strong reason to go build in-house, because otherwise you get this problem Jillian mentioned with maintainability and scalability. We have a lot of actually great internal tools that we're still using today, but are they the right tools for Thumbtack's success over the next 5 to 10 years? Almost certainly not. And so the question becomes then, like, one question I'm grappling with as a leader myself is, like what Julian alluded to, like, how do you make it legible to leadership, right? Like, what is the trade-off and cost of keeping with your current in-house stack that served you so well versus switching to something that sets you up for the next 5 to 10 years of growth? You gotta keep your own metrics on how many data issues are your analysts experiencing? How often is your organization struggling with data? How do you quantify that struggle? And so that, I think, is where my mind goes in terms of what I would do to address this problem. But in terms of my own bias, I tend to think unless there's really nothing available off the shelf, there's no reason to build when there's such great open source and industry standard tooling that's just exploded over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and to the point of hiring, I think that for data teams, hiring has been as hard as ever recently. And I think that something that I've sensed talking to the sort of hands-on data practitioners and ICs is that it becomes increasingly important what are the workflows, what are the tools that companies use when they make decisions for choosing the next role. And so I think it may be a good idea for the companies hiring to actually start advertising their stacks and how they invest in productive workflows and what tools they use and what technologies, so that they can differentiate themselves from all the open roles out there. The same way that for software engineering roles, companies try to go for even the more popular and more easy to use languages and frameworks and deployment processes.
I think it's that, and I think communicating that as a company you're open to trying new solutions and are, I don't like the cutting edge, everything is cutting edge, but it's not that, but the idea that the team that you're potentially going to join is open to trying things and looking at new solutions and trying to identify, again, like where the opportunities to buy versus build. And it's not, it's a culture that promotes that versus a culture where like we have what we have and it works just fine. And even though, we've had it for the last 10 years and things have really moved on, but, we're not interested in even trying. I think that difference is really important too, because we talked about it earlier, but like we hope to find people who are interested in stretching and learning new things. And I think most of us are in the same camp. And so being able to move with the market and move as the technology changes is important, and attracting the right people who want to do the same.
Go ahead, Gary.
Okay, I was just gonna say, like, Julia, to your point, like I do that when I'm hiring candidates right now. Is like I'll lay out my stack for them and tell them, hey, where can you improve it? And tell me, your final presentation is nothing more than telling me like how you would come in and bring in something new that we just haven't done before. And I've actually like changed up considerable parts of my stack in previous companies for that very reason, because they, fresh blood brings in fresh perspectives.
Great mindset.
Yeah, I love the idea of telling people what your tooling is and being very transparent with that. I will say something that might be a little bit controversial, which is, as a former hiring manager, I think the thing that motivates and attracts the best talent is actually not related to tooling at all. It's more about showing them the impact that they can have within the company. And as data leaders, that means really embedding your team, whether it's analytics or whether it's data science, whatever it may be, into the core business processes and critical paths for decision making. And the best thing to, the best argument or the best thing to do to attract talented data people is to show them the role that they can have in driving those key business decisions in those critical paths that you've already laid out for them. And certainly tooling is a core part of that. But the end goal, I think, is showing people the vision and showing people how they can have impact within your organization.
There's There's also an interesting dynamic. If, say, you've built a lot of custom in-house tooling, and that tooling was built by a central team that has, grown over time. Their function has changed over time as the organization has hired more analysts kind of throughout the company and embedded in the teams, where because the team that kind of controls and owns the tools knows them inside and out, they end up being a bottleneck. But not only that, it creates this interesting cultural dynamic of deference or animosity, where the central team kind of has all of the knowledge about the tools, and they almost have this steel grip over it. So it makes the relationship between that central team and the other teams a bit, it just adds just tension that isn't productive. And it, there's really an angle of inclusivity and a sense of, all analysts being on the same level, or at least being able to achieve the same levels despite what team you're on. I don't see that talked about too much, but it's something that I paid attention to and definitely saw happening in my role at HubSpot.
Wow, I would love to continue this conversation for another couple of hours and probably grab a cup of tea, but we have to be mindful of everyone's schedules. So it's really awesome to being able to cover a great range of topics, and technical and more of meta conversations. I would like to thank all the speakers who came today and presented lightning talks and participated in the panel and shared their insights. I hope that everyone who watched them today also is aware that every one of them is probably hiring. And so please go ahead and check out their openings, because every one of these leaders is doing something interesting. You see that they're invested in the best tools and in making sure that analytics is used for the good purpose and impactfully. And we will also share the digest recordings with everyone who is currently attending and who hasn't been able to. So please stay tuned for our future events. And if you're interested in being on the panel or in giving a lightning talk, we're always open to that. So please email community@datafold.com. So I would like to wish everyone the productive rest of their day and the week, and keep up the good work. Thank you all.
Thanks. Bye, Gleb. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gleb.
Bye.